The bread was still warm in her hands when the door slammed shut behind her. Nora Oakes froze in the middle of the vast kitchen, her fingers clutching the stolen loaf against her chest like it was the last thing tethering her to life. Maybe it was. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, and the dizziness that had been her constant companion for weeks now threatened to pull her down to the marble floor. The kitchen stretched before her like a cathedral of wealth, all gleaming copper pots and pristine countertops that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. She should have known better than to break into a place like this, but desperation had a way of making even the worst ideas seem reasonable. The sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond the kitchen, measured and unhurried, and Nora's heart kicked into a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She'd been so careful, waiting until well past midnight, watching the enormous estate for hours to make sure no one was awake. The wrought iron gates had been open, almost like an invitation, and the side door to the kitchen had been unlocked. It had seemed like fate, like the universe finally throwing her a lifeline after months of watching her world crumble. She'd been wrong. The footsteps grew closer, and Nora's survival instincts finally kicked in. She shoved the bread into her worn jacket and looked around frantically for an exit, but the kitchen had only 2 doors, and she'd already come through one of them. The other led deeper into the house toward whoever was coming. The windows were too high, too narrow. She was trapped. The door swung open with a whisper of sound, and Nora forgot how to breathe. The man who entered was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the low light of the kitchen. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, not the yellow white of age, but the crystalline white of fresh snow. He wore dark clothing that looked expensive even to her untrained eye, all tailored lines and subtle elegance. But it was his face that made her knees weak. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. He had sharp, aristocratic features that looked carved from marble, high cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass. His eyes were the color of fresh blood, bright and inhuman, and fixed directly on her. "Well," he said, and his voice was like silk draped over steel. "This is unexpected." Nora couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every cell in her body screamed at her to run, but her legs had turned to water. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the city had. Whispers about the old families who lived in the estates on the hill, the ones who never came out during the day, who threw elaborate parties that lasted until dawn, the ones who weren't quite human. Vampires. God, she'd broken into a vampire's house. The vampire tilted his head slightly, studying her with those impossible red eyes. "You're trembling," he observed, taking a step closer. "Are you afraid of me, or are you simply cold?" "Both," Nora managed, and was surprised her voice worked at all. Her hand instinctively tightened on the bread hidden in her jacket. A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his perfect face. Honest? How refreshing. He moved with fluid grace to stand between her and the door she'd entered through, effectively cutting off her only escape route. "I am Dreven Thornhart, and this is my home. You've broken into my kitchen in the middle of the night. I assume you have a reason?" Nora swallowed hard. There was no point in lying. "I was hungry." "Hungry," Dreven repeated, and something shifted in his expression. His gaze swept over her, taking in details she knew painted a grim picture. The hollows under her cheekbones, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame, the trembling that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with weakness. "How long since you've eaten?" 3 days, she admitted. "Maybe 4. I lost track." Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Nora waited for him to call the police, or worse. Vampires were supposed to be dangerous, unpredictable. She'd just confessed to stealing from one of the most powerful creatures in the city. But Dreven simply stood there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he moved, so fast she didn't have time to react. One moment he was by the door, the next he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the preternatural stillness of his chest, the way he didn't breathe like a living person would. His hand reached out, and Nora flinched, but he only gently pulled the bread from her jacket. "This is what you came for?" he asked quietly. "Bread?" Shame burned through her, hot and acidic. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I won't tell anyone about you, I swear." "Sit down," Dreven said, and it wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a suggestion either. When Nora didn't move, he gestured to the large wooden table that dominated the center of the kitchen. Sit down. Her legs gave out and she sank into one of the chairs, more from exhaustion than obedience. Draven set the bread on the table in front of her, then turned and began moving around the kitchen with purpose. Nora watched in confusion as he pulled out plates, opened the massive refrigerator, began setting food on the counter. Cheese, cold cuts, fruit, pastries that looked like they'd come from an expensive bakery. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small. "Setting the table," Draven replied, as if it were obvious. He moved with economical grace, every gesture precise and controlled. Within minutes, the table was laden with more food than Nora had seen in months. Fresh bread, not just the loaf she'd tried to steal, but several others. Butter and jam, sliced meats and cheeses, grapes and strawberries, delicate pastries filled with cream and chocolate. A feast fit for royalty, and he was arranging it all in front of her. "I don't understand," Nora whispered. Draven pulled out the chair across from her and sat, his movements liquid and graceful. "You're starving, so eat." "Why would you?" "Because I am many things, miss." He raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Oakes, Nora Oakes." "Because I am many things, Miss Oakes, but I'm not cruel. Not to someone who breaks into my home simply to steal bread." His red eyes held hers, intense and unsettling. "Eat. We'll discuss the rest after." Nora's stomach chose that moment to cramp painfully, and her hands moved before her brain could catch up. She grabbed a piece of bread, spread butter on it with shaking fingers, and took a bite. The taste exploded across her tongue, rich and yeasty and so good it almost hurt. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but within seconds she was devouring it like an animal, tears streaming down her face. Draven didn't speak, didn't move. He simply watched her eat with an expression that might have been sadness or pity or something else entirely. When she finally slowed down, when the desperate edge of hunger had dulled to something bearable, he pushed a glass of water toward her. "Slowly," he advised. "You'll make yourself sick." Nora took the water with trembling hands and sipped it carefully. Now that the initial frenzy was over, embarrassment crashed over her like a wave. She'd just eaten like a starving dog in front of a vampire king, because that's what he had to be, right? The way he carried himself, the obvious wealth, the name Thornheart. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the same breath as words like ancient and powerful and dangerous. "I'm sorry," she said again, wiping at her face. "I didn't know this was your house. I didn't know it was a vampire's house. I was just desperate," Draven finished. "Yes, I gathered that." He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "Tell me what happened. How does a young woman end up breaking into a stranger's home for bread?" Nora wanted to lie, to give some sanitized version that didn't make her sound like a complete failure. But something about the way he looked at her, patient and genuinely curious, made the truth spill out instead. "I lost my job 6 months ago," she began, her voice rough. "The company downsized, last hired, first fired. You know how it goes. I thought I'd find something else quickly, but nothing came through. I burned through my savings paying rent, then I got evicted. I've been living in my car for 2 months, but then my car broke down and I couldn't afford to fix it. I've been staying in shelters when I can get a bed, but they're always full. I applied for assistance, but there's so much red tape, and I needed an address, and everything just kept falling apart." She took a shaky breath, staring down at the food on the table. "I tried the soup kitchens, but they're only open certain hours, and there are always lines. I started getting weak, couldn't think straight. Tonight I was walking, and I saw your gates open, and I just thought if I could get some food, just enough to keep going a little longer, maybe I could figure something out. Maybe I'd have the energy to make it to another interview." Draven was quiet for a long moment. "You have family? Friends?" "My parents died when I was 19. Car accident. I was an only child. I had friends, but they have their own problems. I couldn't ask them to support me when they're barely making it themselves." Nora finally looked up at him. "I'm not looking for pity. I'll pay you back for the food somehow. I'm not a thief, not really. I was just desperate," he said again, and this time there was something different in his tone, something dark and angry, but not directed at her. "You live in a city surrounded by wealth, and you've been starving in the streets while people walk past you every day. That's just how it is, Nora said tiredly. The world isn't fair. I learned that a long time ago. No, Draven agreed, his voice soft and dangerous. It isn't. He stood abruptly, moving to stare out one of the high windows. You understand what I am? A vampire, Nora said. If the stories are true, they are. And do you know what that means? That you drink blood, that you're immortal, that you're dangerous. All true. He turned to face her, and in the dim light he looked otherworldly, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. It also means I've lived for over 300 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched humanity struggle and adapt and survive through plagues and wars and disasters. And I've learned that the measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. He moved back to the table, his presence commanding even in stillness. Your city, your country, your world is failing that measure spectacularly. Nora didn't know what to say to that. She took another careful bite of bread, letting the silence stretch. I'm going to make you an offer, Draven said finally. You may refuse, and if you do, I'll let you leave with enough food to last you a week and enough money to secure lodging. But I hope you'll consider accepting. Suspicion prickled at the back of Nora's neck. What kind of offer? I need someone to manage my household. A housekeeper, if you will. Someone to maintain the estate during the day when I cannot. He gestured around the kitchen. As you can see, I have space. I would provide room and board, a salary, and you would work reasonable hours. Nothing exploitative, I assure you. Why? Nora asked bluntly. You don't know me. I just broke into your house. Because you remind me of someone, Draven said quietly. Someone who was also let down by the world, who also struggled to survive in a society that didn't care if she lived or died. And because I've lived too long to ignore suffering when it walks into my kitchen in the middle of the night, there had to be a catch. There was always a catch. And what would you want from me, besides housekeeping? Draven's expression didn't change. Exactly what I said. Housekeeping. I have no interest in taking advantage of you, Miss Oakes. I don't feed on unwilling humans, if that's what concerns you. I have arrangements with donors who participate willingly and are well compensated. Then why me? You could hire anyone, someone with experience, with references. Because you need help, and I'm offering it. He met her eyes steadily. Because I'm tired of watching people suffer when I have the means to do something about it. You can think of it as charity if you like, or you can think of it as an employment opportunity. Either way, the offer stands. Nora looked around the kitchen, at the feast spread before her, at the vampire watching her with ancient red eyes. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a bad idea, that accepting help from a creature like him would end in disaster. But she was so tired of being cold and hungry and scared, tired of the constant struggle just to make it through another day. I'll do it, she heard herself say. I'll take the job. Something that might have been satisfaction crossed Draven's face. Good. Finish eating, then I'll show you to your room. You can start tomorrow, or rather, today, once you've rested. Just like that? Nora asked, still half convinced this was some kind of fever dream. Just like that. Draven stood, moving toward the door. Take your time with the food. Your quarters are in the east wing, third door on the left when you reach the top of the stairs. There's a bathroom attached, and the closet should have clothes that will fit you until we can arrange to get you properly outfitted. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at her. Welcome to Thornhart Manor, Miss Oakes. Try not to steal anything else. And then he was gone, leaving Nora alone in the kitchen with a table full of food and the strangest job offer she'd ever received. She sat there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then, because she was still hungry, and because the food was there, and because she might as well take advantage of it while she could, she reached for another piece of bread. The room Draven had directed her to was more luxurious than anywhere Nora had ever slept. The bed was enormous, covered in soft linens that probably cost more than a month's rent at her old apartment. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub and heated floors. The closet, as promised, contained clothes in her size, simple but well made. She took a hot shower that lasted until the water ran cold, washing away weeks of grime and exhaustion, then collapsed into the bed still damp and fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the gauzy curtains. She lay there for a moment, disoriented, before memory crashed back. The break-in, the vampire, the job offer that seemed too good to be true. She got dressed in jeans and a soft sweater from the closet, both of which fit perfectly, and made her way back down to the kitchen. The house looked different in daylight, less intimidating and more like an actual home. The architecture was old, Gothic in style, with high ceilings and dark wood, but it was clean and well-maintained. Clearly, Draven hadn't been lying about needing a housekeeper. A note was waiting for her on the kitchen table, written in elegant script. Miss Oakes, I trust you slept well. Please make yourself at home. The pantry and refrigerator are fully stocked. Help yourself to whatever you need. I've left a list of basic housekeeping tasks that need attention, but don't overexert yourself. You're still recovering. I'll find you this evening after sunset. Dia. The list was surprisingly reasonable. Dusting, basic cleaning, laundry, nothing she couldn't handle, and nothing that would take more than a few hours. Nora spent the day exploring the manor, familiarizing herself with its layout, and tackling the tasks on Draven's list. It felt surreal, working in this beautiful house, eating whenever she was hungry, knowing she had a safe place to sleep. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the catch to reveal itself. But as the sun began to set, and shadows stretched long across the floors, nothing terrible had happened. She was standing in the library dusting the endless shelves of books when she felt a presence behind her. You work quickly, Draven said, and Nora nearly dropped her dustcloth. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, looking exactly as he had the night before, perfect and pale and unsettlingly beautiful. You startled me. My apologies. Old habits. He moved into the library, his gaze sweeping over the shelves. I forget that humans need more warning. How are you feeling? Better, Nora admitted. Fed and rested and clean. It's been a while. I imagine so. Draven picked up a book from one of the tables, his long fingers tracing the spine absently. I wanted to go over some ground rules if you're amenable. Of course. First, your working hours are entirely up to you. I require only that certain tasks are completed regularly: cleaning, laundry, meal preparation if I have guests. Beyond that, your time is your own. Second, there are certain parts of the manor that are off limits. My personal chambers, the basement levels, and the west wing. The rest of the house is yours to explore as you wish. Nora nodded, committing this to memory. The third, I may occasionally have guests. Other vampires mostly, though sometimes human associates. You're not required to serve them or interact with them beyond basic courtesy. If any of them make you uncomfortable, tell me immediately, and I'll handle it. Why would they make me uncomfortable? Nora asked, then immediately regretted the question. Draven's expression darkened slightly. Because not all vampires share my views on human dignity. Some of my kind see your people as nothing more than food or entertainment. I don't allow such behavior in my home, but that doesn't mean all my visitors will be pleasant. A chill ran down Nora's spine. And you're different? I'm a king, Draven said simply. Or I was once. I ruled a territory in Eastern Europe before the modern borders were drawn. I've seen what happens when those in power abuse it, and I have no interest in perpetuating such cruelty. He set the book down and looked at her directly. You're safe here, Miss Oakes. I give you my word. Why should I trust the word of a vampire? Because unlike humans, we cannot lie, not outright. We can misdirect, omit, mislead, but we cannot speak a direct falsehood. It's part of our nature, a magical binding from the old days. He paused. When I tell you that you're safe, I mean it literally. Nora absorbed this. Nora, trying to reconcile it with everything she thought she knew. The stories never mentioned that. The stories get many things wrong. We don't turn into bats, for instance, and we can't enter a home without permission, but that only applies to residences where we haven't been explicitly invited. Once you invite a vampire in, the threshold is broken. Is that why your gate was open? Why the door was unlocked? A faint smile crossed Draven's face. Perhaps. Or perhaps I was simply careless. Somehow Nora doubted that. A vampire who'd lived for 300 years didn't seem the type to be careless, but if he wanted to pretend he'd left the gate open by accident, rather than admit he might have been hoping to help someone exactly like her, she could play along. What's my salary? She asked, because that seemed like something she should know. Draven named a figure that made her dizzy. It was more than she'd been making at her old job, more than she'd dreamed of making. That's too much. It's fair compensation for the work I'm asking you to do and for the discretion I expect you to maintain regarding my nature. You're free to spend it however you wish, though I'd advise you to save some. Financial security is important." Nora almost laughed. Financial advice from a 300-year-old vampire. Her life had officially become a nightmare, or maybe a fairy tale. The next few weeks passed in a strange but comfortable routine. Nora worked during the day, maintaining the manor and slowly learning its quirks and secrets. She discovered the greenhouse attached to the back of the house, full of night-blooming flowers that Draven apparently cultivated himself. She found the music room with its antique piano, the wine cellar stocked with bottles that had to be priceless, the art gallery filled with paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. Draven appeared each evening after sunset, often working in his study or the library. Sometimes he had guests, other vampires who arrived in expensive cars and regarded Nora with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. She learned to recognize them by their pale skin and white hair, by the way they moved with that same liquid grace, by the feeling of danger that clung to them like perfume. Draven was always nearby during those visits, a silent presence that made it clear she was under his protection. None of the other vampires spoke to her beyond basic pleasantries, and she was fine with that. Sometimes, in the evenings, Draven would find her in the library or the kitchen, and they'd talk. Small conversations at first, just questions about how she was settling in or whether she needed anything. But gradually, they grew longer, deeper. He asked about her life before, about her parents and her dreams and what she'd wanted before everything fell apart. She asked about his past, about the centuries he'd lived through, about what it was like to be immortal. "Lonely," he'd said one night, his red eyes distant. "Mostly lonely. Everyone you love dies. Everything you build crumbles. You learn to hold things loosely, to not attach too deeply, because permanence is an illusion." "That sounds awful," Nora had replied. "It has its moments of beauty, but yes, it can be difficult." She found herself looking forward to those conversations, to the evenings when Draven would join her and they'd talk until late into the night. He was different from anyone she'd ever known, intelligent and thoughtful, with perspectives shaped by centuries of experience. He could discuss philosophy and history and art with equal ease, but he also listened when she talked about her own life, about the small moments and everyday struggles that must have seemed insignificant to someone who'd lived as long as he had. But he never made her feel insignificant. That was the thing that surprised her most. He treated her opinions and thoughts as valuable, her experiences as worthy of attention. For someone who'd spent months feeling invisible, it was intoxicating. One evening, about a month after she'd moved in, Nora was preparing dinner for herself in the kitchen when Draven appeared earlier than usual. He looked agitated, his movements less controlled than normal. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting down her knife. "I need to ask you something," Draven said, and there was an urgency in his voice that made her nervous. "There's a gathering tomorrow night, a meeting of the Vampire Council that governs this region. I'm required to attend, and I'm permitted to bring a human companion. Would you be willing to accompany me?" Nora blinked. "Me? Why?" "Because showing up with a human companion demonstrates a certain level of civilized behavior. It's political theater, essentially. You wouldn't need to do anything except be present and look comfortable. But I understand if you'd rather not. It could be overwhelming, being surrounded by so many vampires." "How many is many?" "Perhaps 50. Most of the territory's ruling class. 50 vampires in one place. The idea was terrifying, but there was something in the way Draven asked, something that suggested this was important to him, even if he was trying to make it sound casual. "What would I need to wear?" Nora asked. Relief flickered across Draven's face. "I'll have something appropriate delivered tomorrow. Thank you, Miss Oakes. I realize this is beyond your normal duties." "Nora," she said. "You can call me Nora. Miss Oakes makes me sound like a school teacher." "Nora," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made warmth bloom in her chest. "Then you should call me Draven. We've been living under the same roof for a month now. Formality seems excessive." The dress that was delivered the next afternoon was stunning. Deep burgundy silk that flowed like water, with a neckline that was elegant without being too revealing. It fit perfectly, and Nora wondered how Draven had known her measurements. Maybe vampires had some kind of supernatural ability to judge such things, or maybe he'd simply paid very close attention. She spent the afternoon getting ready, styling her hair, and applying makeup she found in the bathroom that seemed to have been placed there specifically for her. When she finally descended the stairs that evening, Draven was waiting in the foyer. He'd changed into what she could only describe as formal vampire attire, all black except for a deep red shirt that complemented her dress. His white hair was pulled back, revealing the elegant lines of his face. When he saw her, he went very still. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." A hint of amusement crossed his face. "High praise indeed." He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" The gathering was held in a mansion even larger than Draven's, a Gothic fortress on the edge of the city that looked like it had been transplanted from medieval Europe. The interior was all dark wood and velvet, lit by candles and chandeliers, and vampires everywhere she looked, pale skin and white hair and red eyes that tracked her movement with predatory interest. Draven kept her close, his hand on the small of her back, his presence a constant shield. Other vampires approached to speak with him, their conversations flowing between English and languages Nora didn't recognize. They regarded her with curiosity, but no one challenged her presence. "Draven," a female vampire said, gliding over with inhuman grace. She was breathtaking, with features that could have been sculpted by a master artist. "How delightful that you've brought a pet." Nora felt Draven tense beside her. "Nora is my employee, Seraphine, not a pet. I'd appreciate you treating her with respect." Seraphine's red eyes gleamed. "Of course. My apologies." She looked at Nora directly, and there was something calculating in her gaze. "Tell me, girl, what's it like living with the fallen king? Does he still brood about the old days?" "He's been nothing but kind," Nora said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I consider myself fortunate." "Fortunate," Seraphine repeated, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "How quaint?" She turned her attention back to Draven. "There are rumors, you know, about you and your soft heart. Some say you're losing your edge, that you've gone weak in your old age." "Some say many things," Draven replied, his tone flat. "I've learned not to put much stock in gossip." "Still," Seraphine pressed, "bringing a human to a council meeting, treating her like an equal rather than food. It sends a message, darling, and not everyone will interpret it kindly." "Then they're welcome to take it up with me directly," Draven said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I'm not concerned about the opinions of those who lack the courage to speak to my face." Seraphine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Still proud. Good. I'd hate to see you completely domesticated." She drifted away, leaving Nora shaken. "Are you all right?" Draven asked quietly, his hand gentle on her back. "Is she right? Are you in trouble because of me?" Seraphine likes to stir up drama. It's her favorite pastime. "Yes, some of the old guard disapprove of how I choose to live, but that's nothing new. They've been disapproving for decades." He guided her toward a quieter corner of the room. "I should have warned you that not everyone would be welcoming." "It's fine," Nora said, though her heart was still pounding. "I can handle some disapproving looks." "You shouldn't have to." Before Nora could respond, a bell chimed and the room fell silent. A vampire who looked ancient even by their standards, his white hair so long it nearly touched the floor, stepped onto a raised platform at the far end of the room. "The council convenes," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly. "All who have business, speak." What followed was essentially a vampire court session. Various members brought up issues, territory disputes, problems with rogue vampires, questions about their relationship with the human world. Draven listened intently but didn't speak, though several times other vampires seemed to defer to his opinion with nods or glances. It was during a particularly tense discussion about feeding regulations that things went wrong. A young vampire, probably only a century old if Nora was learning to judge ages correctly, stood up abruptly. "Why are we even debating this? Humans are cattle. We should take what we need without all this ridiculous bureaucracy." Murmurs rippled through the room, some agreeing, some objecting. Draven remained still, but Nora could feel the tension radiating from him. "The old ways are dead," someone else argued. "We live in a modern world. We must adapt or face extinction." "Adapt?" The young vampire's laugh was harsh. "You mean grovel? Pretend we're not superior? Look around you, we have a human in our sacred space, treated like she belongs here." It's an insult to everything we are." His red eyes locked onto Nora, and the hatred in them made her blood run cold. "You," he said, starting toward her, "you're a perfect example. Walking around like you're not just a meal waiting to happen. Let me show everyone what humans are really good for." He moved fast, but Draven moved faster. One moment he was beside Nora, the next he was between her and the young vampire, his hand wrapped around the other's throat. "Touch her," Draven said, his voice deadly quiet, "and I'll remind everyone in this room exactly why I was a king." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Every vampire was on their feet now, watching the confrontation with hungry eyes. The ancient vampire on the platform raised a hand. "Draven Thornheart," he said calmly, "you dare threaten another council member?" "I dare protect what is mine," Draven replied, not taking his eyes off the vampire he held. "This human is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me. That includes hot-headed children who haven't learned respect." "I'm not a child," the young vampire choked out. "I'm Lucian Ravencrest, and I don't recognize your authority anymore. You gave up your throne. You're nothing now." Draven's grip tightened. "I gave up a crown, not my power. Would you like a demonstration?" "Enough," the ancient vampire commanded. "Draven, release him. Lucian, you will apologize to both Draven and his companion, or you will be removed from this council permanently." Lucian looked mutinous, but when Draven's hand didn't loosen, he finally spat out, "I apologize." "Accepted," Draven said, releasing him. Lucian stumbled back, rubbing his throat. Draven turned to Nora, his expression softening. "We're leaving. But the meeting is over for us." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and led her toward the exit. No one tried to stop them. They didn't speak until they were in Draven's car, pulling away from the mansion. Nora's hands were shaking, adrenaline still flooding her system. Draven drove with controlled precision, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I shouldn't have come. I caused problems for you." "You caused nothing," Draven said sharply. "Lucian is a fool who's been looking for an excuse to challenge me for years. If it hadn't been you, it would have been something else. Still, Seraphine was right, wasn't she? You're getting pushback because of how you treat me. Because you're treating a human like a person." "Yes," Draven admitted. "And I don't care. I stopped caring what the council thought of me decades ago." He glanced at her, his red eyes intense in the darkness of the car. "You're not just an employee to me anymore, Nora. I need you to understand that." Nora's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere in the last month, you became important. You became someone I look forward to seeing every evening, someone whose opinions I value, someone I want to protect not out of duty, but because the thought of anything happening to you is unbearable." He pulled the car over to the side of the road, turning to face her fully. "I'm 300 years old, and I've been alone for most of that time. I've watched humans live and die, and I learned long ago not to get attached. But then you broke into my kitchen, starving and desperate and so brave you stole bread from a vampire just to survive. And something in me shifted." "Draven," Nora whispered, her heart hammering. "I'm drawn to you," he continued, his voice low and intense. "In a way I haven't been drawn to anyone in centuries. And I know this is complicated and probably terrifying for you, and if you want me to stop, to maintain a professional distance, I will. But I needed you to know. After tonight, after seeing how they looked at you, I needed you to know that you matter to me." Nora stared at him, this beautiful, ancient creature who was looking at her like she was something precious. Every rational part of her brain said this was insane, that falling for a vampire was a recipe for disaster. But her heart, her traitorous heart, was already several steps ahead. "You matter to me, too," she said softly. "I didn't want to admit it, even to myself. But these conversations we have, the time we spend together, it's the best part of my day. Every day." Draven's expression transformed, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. "Nora, I'm scared," she interrupted. "I'm scared of what this means, of how different we are, of the fact that you'll live forever and I won't. But I'm also tired of being afraid. For months I was afraid of starving, of freezing, of dying alone. Now I have a chance to be afraid of something better, afraid of wanting someone who makes me feel alive again." I would never hurt you, Draven said, reaching out to cup her face with his hand. His skin was cool against hers, but gentle. I swear on every year of my existence I would never hurt you. I know, Nora said, and realized she meant it. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. So what do we do now? Now, Draven said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I take you home, and tomorrow, if you're willing, we figure out what this is between us. Together. Nora opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I'm willing. The drive back to the manor felt different, charged with possibility. Draven kept one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers, his touch constant and reassuring. When they arrived, he walked her to her room, and they stood in the hallway for a long moment, neither quite ready to part. Thank you, Draven finally said, for tonight, for your courage, for giving me hope I'd forgotten I could feel. Nora rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. His skin was cool but smooth, and she felt him go very still. Good night, Draven. Good night, Nora. She slipped into her room, closing the door behind her, and leaned against it with a racing heart. Outside, she heard Draven remain for a moment before his footsteps retreated down the hall. The next few weeks were a strange and wonderful period of adjustment. Nora and Draven didn't rush things. Their relationship shifted gradually, from employer and employee to something deeper and more complex. They spent their evenings together, talking and laughing, learning each other's quirks and preferences. Draven showed her parts of the manor she'd never seen before, rooms filled with treasures from his long life. She told him about her dreams, the ones she'd put aside when survival became her only goal. I wanted to be a writer, she admitted one night, curled up in the library with a book in her lap. Stupid, right? Everyone wants to be a writer. Not stupid at all, Draven said from his chair across from her. What would you write about? Stories, adventures, romance maybe, things that let people escape their lives for a while. She laughed self-consciously. I guess I wanted to create the kind of magic I couldn't find in the real world. You could still do that, Draven pointed out. You have time now. Security? Why not try? Nora looked at him, this vampire who believed in her dreams and felt something warm settle in her chest. Maybe I will. And she did. She started writing in the mornings before beginning her housekeeping tasks. Small things at first, just fragments and scenes. But Draven encouraged her, asked to read what she'd written, offered feedback that was thoughtful and genuine. For the first time in years, Nora felt like she was building toward something instead of just surviving. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, carefully. Draven was always cautious, always mindful of his strength and his nature. Their first real kiss happened one evening in the greenhouse, surrounded by night-blooming flowers. It was soft and sweet and made Nora's toes curl. His lips were cool, but his touch was gentle, reverent even, like she was something precious. Is this okay? He'd whispered against her mouth. More than okay, she'd replied, pulling him back down for another kiss. But their happiness was fragile, and Nora should have known it couldn't last undisturbed. The attack came on a Tuesday night, 2 months after the council meeting. Nora was in the kitchen preparing tea when she heard glass shatter somewhere in the manor. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Draven was in his study. She'd seen him there just minutes ago. More sounds followed, crashes, the thud of bodies hitting walls, voices raised in anger. Nora grabbed a knife from the counter, her hands shaking, and crept toward the hallway. She should hide, should lock herself in a room and wait for whatever this was to pass. But the sounds were coming from the direction of Draven's study, and the thought of him in danger overrode her self-preservation instincts. She found chaos in the grand entrance hall. 5 vampires she didn't recognize had forced their way into the manor, and Draven was fighting them with lethal grace. He moved like violence-made art, fast and fluid and utterly controlled. But he was outnumbered, and one of the attackers already had a wound on his arm that was bleeding sluggishly. Nora's presence must have distracted him because Draven's head turned toward her for just a second. It was enough. One of the attackers lunged, and Draven took a blow to the chest that sent him crashing into the wall. "Draven!" Nora screamed. "Run!" he shouted back, already recovering, but 2 of the vampires had broken away from the fight and were heading straight for her. Nora ran, not away but toward them, the kitchen knife clutched in her hand. It was stupid and suicidal, and she didn't care. If they wanted to hurt Draven, they'd have to go through her first. She slashed at the first vampire who reached her, catching him across the arm. He hissed, more surprised than hurt, and backhanded her hard enough to send her sprawling. Pain exploded through her skull, and blood filled her mouth. "Nora!" Draven's voice was anguished, and then everything became a blur of violence. He was there, between her and the attackers, and the careful control he usually maintained was gone. He was terrifying now, all fangs and fury, moving with a speed and strength that reminded her exactly what he was. A king. The fight was over in seconds. 4 of the attackers were down, unconscious or worse. The 5th, the one Nora had cut, was pinned against the wall with Draven's hand around his throat. "Who sent you?" Draven demanded, his voice like death itself. "Lucian," the vampire choked out. "He said you were weak now, that you'd be distracted by your human pet. He wants your territory, Thornheart. He wants everything you've got." "Tell Lucian," Draven said, his words precise and cold, "that if he wants my territory, he can come claim it himself. But he won't survive the attempt." He released the vampire, who dropped to the floor gasping. "Get out. Take your friends, and tell Lucian what you saw here. Tell him exactly what happened when he threatened what's mine." The conscious vampire scrambled to gather his companions and fled, leaving a trail of blood and broken furniture. As soon as they were gone, Draven turned to Nora, his fury dissolving into concern. "You're hurt," he said, kneeling beside where she'd fallen. His hands were gentle as he examined her face, but she could see them shaking. "God, Nora, you're bleeding." "I'm okay," she said, though her head was throbbing and her vision was a little blurry. "You're the one who got hit." "I heal." Draven carefully helped her to her feet, supporting her when she swayed. "You don't. Come on, let's get you cleaned up." He carried her to the bathroom despite her protests, sitting her on the counter while he gently cleaned the cut on her lip and checked her for other injuries. His touch was so careful, so tender, that Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "What were you thinking?" he asked quietly, pressing a cold cloth to her rapidly swelling cheek. "Running at vampires with a kitchen knife?" "I was thinking they were going to hurt you," Nora replied, "and I couldn't let that happen." Draven went very still, the cloth hovering near her face. "You could have been killed. So could you. I'm immortal, Nora. I've survived worse than a few assassins." "You're not invincible," she shot back, "and I couldn't just hide while you fought alone." "I couldn't." Draven set the cloth aside and cupped her face in both hands, careful of her injuries. His red eyes were intense, swirling with emotions she couldn't name. "You magnificent, foolish woman," he whispered. "Don't you understand? If something happened to you, if they'd hurt you because of me, I couldn't bear it." "Then I guess we're even," Nora said, covering his hands with hers, "because I can't bear the thought of losing you either." For a moment they just looked at each other, the weight of what they'd both admitted hanging in the air. Then Draven leaned in and kissed her, soft and careful and full of desperate relief. Nora kissed him back, tasting blood and fear and something deeper, something that felt like love, even though neither of them had said the word yet. When they finally broke apart, Draven rested his forehead against hers. "This has to end," he said quietly. "Lucian is going to keep coming after us until I deal with him permanently." "What does that mean?" "It means I challenge him, formally, one-on-one in front of the council. Winner takes all territory status, everything." "And if you lose?" Nora asked, though she already knew the answer. "I won't lose." Draven pulled back to look at her directly. "But if I do, if something goes wrong, I need you to promise me you'll leave the city. I've set up accounts in your name, enough money to start over anywhere you want. Promise me you'll use it, that you'll build the life you deserve." "I'm not leaving you," Nora said firmly. "Nora, no. We're in this together, remember? Whatever happens, we face it together." Draven looked like he wanted to argue, but finally he just pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Together," he agreed softly. The challenge was issued the next night. Draven called an emergency council meeting, striding into that Gothic mansion with Nora at his side and deadly purpose in every line of his body. When he announced his intention to challenge Lucian for insulting his honor and threatening his household, the room erupted in excited whispers. Lucian, for his part, looked smug. "About time you remembered you had a spine, Thornheart. I accept your challenge. The combat will take place in 3 nights, the ancient vampire on the platform announced. Traditional rules apply. Fight to submission or death. The winner claims the loser's territory and assets. I have one condition, Draven said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Regardless of the outcome, Nora Oakes is to be left untouched. She's protected by my name, and that protection extends beyond my death should it come to that. Does the council agree? The ancient vampire considered this, then nodded. It is reasonable. Does anyone object? Silence. Even Seraphine, who'd been watching the proceedings with amusement, said nothing. Then it's settled, Draven said. He took Nora's hand and led her from the room, leaving whispers and speculation in his wake. The 3 days before the challenge were the longest of Nora's life. Draven spent his time preparing, working out in a private gym she hadn't known existed in the manor's basement. She tried to stay out of his way, to give him space to focus, but fear gnawed at her constantly. On the night before the challenge, she found him in the greenhouse standing among the flowers with his eyes closed. Can't sleep? She asked softly. Don't need to, Draven replied, opening his eyes. But I've been thinking. About the fight? About you. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling, he looked like something from a dream. About how you came into my life because you were desperate and hungry, and how now I can't imagine existing without you. Nora crossed to him, taking his hands. They were cool as always, steady and strong. You're going to win tomorrow. You have to. I need to tell you something, Draven said. In case I don't, you will. Nora, please, let me say this. He took a breath he didn't need, a very human gesture. I love you. I've loved you since you stood in my kitchen with stolen bread and didn't apologize for surviving. I loved you when you agreed to work for me, even though you were terrified. I loved you when you ran at armed vampires with a kitchen knife, because you thought I needed help. I love you now, and I'll love you until my last breath, whether that's tomorrow or centuries from now. Tears streamed down Nora's face. I love you too, she whispered. So much it scares me. Draven pulled her close, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding on like she could keep him safe through sheer force of will. They stayed that way for a long time, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in the darkness, stealing what peace they could before dawn came. The challenge took place in an underground arena beneath the city, a space that looked like it had been carved out centuries ago. Vampires filled the stone seats, hundreds of them, all come to watch Draven Thornheart fight for his honor and his territory. Nora sat in a special box reserved for the combatants' companions, flanked by guards who were ostensibly there for her protection, but felt more like jailers. Draven and Lucian entered from opposite sides of the arena. Lucian looked confident, almost cocky, moving with the swagger of someone who thought they'd already won. Draven looked calm, centered, every inch the king he used to be. Any last words? Lucian called across the space. Don't embarrass yourself, Draven replied evenly. Then the bell rang and they were moving. The fight was brutal and beautiful and terrible all at once. They moved faster than Nora's eyes could follow sometimes, blurs of white and black colliding with bone-rattling force. Lucian fought with raw power and youthful aggression. Draven fought with centuries of experience and perfect control, turning Lucian's strength against him, using precision where Lucian used force. Blood spattered the arena floor. Both fighters took hits that would have killed a human instantly. But Draven's earlier confidence proved warranted. He was simply better. More skilled, more strategic, more dangerous than Lucian had anticipated. The end came suddenly. Lucian overextended on a lunge, and Draven caught him, using his momentum to flip him and pin him to the ground, with a hand around his throat and a knee on his chest. Submit, Draven commanded. Lucian struggled, his pride keeping him fighting even as it became clear he couldn't break free. Draven's grip tightened. Submit, or I end this permanently. I submit, Lucian finally choked out. I submit. Draven released him immediately and stood, turning to face the council box. It's done, he announced. Lucian Ravencrest is stripped of his territory and status. He'll leave the city by dawn and not return. The ancient vampire stood, regarding the scene below. So witnessed, so recorded, Draven Thornheart's claim is upheld. Lucian Ravencrest is banished. He paused, then added, Perhaps this will remind others that age and experience still matter in our world. Cheers and applause erupted from the crowd, though Nora suspected some of it was simply bloodlust satisfied. She didn't care. Dreven was alive, he'd won, and he was looking up at her box with such relief and love in his eyes that her heart felt too big for her chest. They didn't speak until they were back at the manor, safely behind locked doors. Then Nora threw herself at Dreven, wrapping her arms around him and holding on tight. He caught her easily, burying his face in her hair. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe. We're safe." "I was so scared," Nora admitted, her words muffled against his chest. "I tried to be brave, but I was terrified." "I know. I'm sorry I put you through that." Draven pulled back enough to look at her. "But it had to be done. Now the rest of the council knows that I'm still capable of defending what's mine. They'll think twice before sending anyone else after us." "What happens now?" "Now?" Draven's expression softened. "Now we live. We figure out what a life together looks like, if that's what you want." "It's what I want," Nora said without hesitation. "More than anything." They spent the rest of the night talking, making plans. Draven wanted to travel, to show Nora parts of the world she'd never seen. She wanted to keep writing, to finish the novel she'd started. They talked about the practical considerations, her mortality versus his immortality, what that would mean long-term, but those felt like problems for future versions of themselves. Right now, they had each other, and safety, and the promise of tomorrow. As dawn approached and Draven needed to retreat from the sunlight, he kissed Nora softly. "I love you," he said again, like he couldn't say it enough. "I love you too," she replied. "Now go get some sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." "Promise?" "Promise." The months that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. She fell into a rhythm with Draven, their relationship deepening and strengthening with each passing day. They were partners in every sense of the word. He supported her writing. She helped manage his complicated vampire social obligations. They traveled when they could, spending nights in exotic locations while she soaked up inspiration for her stories. The novel she'd been working on was finished and actually got published, a small press but legitimate. Draven threw a party to celebrate, inviting vampires and humans alike, proving that the two worlds could coexist peacefully. Seraphine even showed up, grudgingly admitting that perhaps Draven hadn't gone completely soft after all. "You're good for him," she told Nora during the party, her tone thoughtful. "I wasn't sure at first, but you've given him purpose again. Made him remember why he fought to become a king in the first place." "He gave me my life back," Nora replied. "I think we're even." "Perhaps?" Seraphine studied her with those unnervingly red eyes. "Has he discussed turning you?" The question made Nora's breath catch. It was something she and Draven had carefully avoided talking about, the elephant in the room of their relationship. "No," she admitted. "He will eventually. He loves you too much to watch you age and die. But it's your choice, always. Don't let him or anyone else pressure you into becoming something you're not ready to be." It was the closest thing to genuine advice Nora had ever received from a vampire, and she found herself oddly touched. "Thank you, Seraphine." The older vampire waved a dismissive hand. "Don't thank me yet. If you do choose to turn, the transition is hell. But I suppose having Draven by your side would help." She drifted away, leaving Nora with much to think about. That night, after all the guests had left and they were cleaning up together, Nora finally broached the subject. "Seraphine asked me if you'd talk to me about turning," she said, stacking glasses carefully. Draven went very still. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that we haven't discussed it." Nora set down the glasses and turned to face him. "Why haven't we?" "Because I didn't want to pressure you," Draven said quietly. "It's your life, your choice. I would never ask you to give up your humanity for me." "But you've thought about it?" "Every day." He moved closer, taking her hands. "Every single day I think about what it will be like when you age, and I don't. When you get sick and I can't fix it, when you eventually die and leave me alone again. It terrifies me, Nora. But I also know that becoming a vampire isn't something to be taken lightly. It's permanent. You'd be giving up sunlight, normal food, the ability to have children. You'd be joining a world that can be cruel and dangerous. I can't ask you to do that." "What if I want to?" Nora asked softly. Draven's eyes widened. Do you? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I want to think about it seriously. Because I can't imagine a future without you either, Draven. These past months have been the best of my life. The thought of that ending, of only having maybe 50 more years with you when you'll live for centuries, it breaks my heart. You don't have to decide now, Draven said, pulling her close. We have time, but not forever. No, he agreed. Not forever, but enough time for you to be sure. Nora buried her face in his chest, breathing in his scent something like winter frost and old books and home. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, I'm scared too, but we'll figure it out together. That became their refrain over the next year. Together. They faced every challenge, every decision, every joy and sorrow as a team. Nora's writing career took off. Her first novel did well enough that she got a contract for 2 more. Draven expanded his territory, bringing more progressive policies to vampire-human relations in the city. They created a life that was rich and full, and occasionally complicated, but always, always worthwhile. On the anniversary of the night Nora had broken into Draven's kitchen, he surprised her with a dinner in that very room. He'd set the table exactly as he had that first night, laden with food and lit by candlelight. I thought we should commemorate the occasion, he said, pulling out her chair. 1 year since you stole bread from the Vampire King. Nora laughed, sitting down. 1 year since the best mistake of my life. Not a mistake, Draven corrected, settling across from her. Fate. They ate and talked and laughed, reminiscing about how far they'd come. And when the meal was finished and they were sitting in comfortable silence, Draven reached across the table and took her hand. I have something to ask you, he said, and there was a nervous quality to his voice she'd never heard before. What is it? I know we've talked about the future, about turning and immortality and all the complications that come with loving someone across species. But there's something I want regardless of what you decide about that. Something I've wanted for months now, but I was waiting for the right moment. He stood, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. From his pocket he produced a small velvet box, and Nora's heart stopped. Nora Oakes, Draven said, opening the box to reveal a ring that sparkled in the candlelight, a deep red stone that looked like captured blood surrounded by tiny diamonds. You saved my life the night you broke into my kitchen. Not from death, but from loneliness. From forgetting what it means to care about something beyond survival. You've given me purpose and joy and love I thought I'd never feel again. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Nora's face as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Draven slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and pulled her into his arms. Is that a yes? He asked softly. Yes, Nora managed. Yes, of course, yes. They held each other in the kitchen where everything had started, surrounded by the ghosts of who they'd been a year ago. A starving woman who'd stolen bread, a lonely vampire who'd shown unexpected mercy, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful. The wedding took place 3 months later, a small ceremony that mixed vampire and human traditions. Nora wore white, Draven wore black, and they exchanged vows in the greenhouse among the night-blooming flowers. Seraphine served as Draven's witness, while Nora's former co-worker, one of the few friends who'd stayed in touch, stood up for her. The ancient vampire from the council officiated, his presence lending gravitas and legitimacy to their union. You are entering into a bond that transcends species, he intoned, a love that defies the natural order. May you face the challenges ahead with courage and commitment. They exchanged rings, Nora's engagement ring and a matching band for Draven, and kissed to applause from their small gathering of guests. It was perfect, intimate, and meaningful, a celebration of everything they'd overcome to reach this moment. The reception lasted until dawn, vampire and human guests mingling more easily than Nora would have thought possible a year ago. As the sun began to rise and the vampires had to depart, Draven pulled Nora aside. I need to go soon, he said, touching her face gently. But I want you to know this has been the happiest night of my very long life. Mine too, Nora said, standing on her toes to kiss him. Go get some rest, husband. I'll be here when you wake. My wife, Draven said wonderingly. You're my wife. I am, forever, if I have anything to say about it." She watched him retreat into the manor as the sun painted the sky pink and gold, this vampire who'd become her everything. And as she stood there in her wedding dress, the ring heavy and real on her finger, Nora made her decision. She found Draven that evening in the library, his favorite place in the house. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening into the smile he reserved just for her. "Hello, wife," he said warmly. "Hello, husband," she replied, settling next to him on the sofa. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About the future. About immortality. About spending eternity with you." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want to turn, Draven. I want to become a vampire." He went very still. "Are you certain? You understand what you'd be giving up?" "I understand. I've thought about nothing else for months. And yes, I'll miss the sun. I'll miss some aspects of being human. But I won't miss growing old without you. I won't miss the countdown to when death separates us. I want centuries with you, Draven. I want forever." "It's not an easy process," he warned. "The transformation is painful, and there's no guarantee some humans don't survive it." "I trust you to guide me through it," Nora said firmly. "I'm ready. I've never been more sure of anything." Draven studied her for a long moment, searching her face for any hint of doubt. Whatever he saw, there must have satisfied him, because he finally nodded. "Then we'll do it, but not today. Give yourself a few more weeks to be absolutely certain. If you still want this at the next full moon, I'll turn you then." The weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Draven explained what would happen, how the transformation worked, what she should expect. It would hurt, there was no way around that. Her human body would die and be reborn as something new, something other. But she'd emerge stronger, faster, immortal, and she'd have Draven by her side through every moment of it. The night of the full moon arrived, clear and cold. Nora stood in their bedroom, wearing a simple nightgown, trying not to let fear overwhelm her resolve. "Last chance to change your mind," Draven said softly. "I'll love you regardless of what you choose." "I'm not changing my mind," Nora said. "I want this. I want you, forever." Draven pulled her close, holding her like she was precious. "Then let's begin." The process was exactly as painful as he'd warned. His bite, usually gentle and careful, was deep and draining. Nora felt her life pouring out, felt herself growing weak and cold. Then came his blood, bitter and burning as it poured down her throat. Her body convulsed, rejecting it even as it absorbed the foreign substance. The pain was indescribable, like being unmade and remade at the cellular level. Through it all, Draven never left her side. He held her, whispered reassurances, promised her it would pass. Hours stretched into what felt like days, and Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between human and vampire, between life and death and whatever came after. Finally, blessedly, the pain began to fade. Nora opened her eyes and the world looked different, sharper, brighter. She could hear Draven's heart beating even though she knew he had no heartbeat, could smell the individual scents of every flower in the greenhouse stories below, could feel the power thrumming through her veins, ancient and terrible and exhilarating. "Nora," Draven asked, his voice cautious, "how do you feel?" She sat up, testing her new body. Everything felt different but also right, like she'd been wearing ill-fitting clothes her whole life and only now slipped into something tailored perfectly. "Strong," she said, and her voice sounded different too, richer. "I feel strong." Draven's expression transformed into pure relief. "It worked. You survived. He cupped her face, and she realized she could feel the coolness of his skin now without the contrast of her own warmth. They were the same temperature, the same species. "I'm like you," Nora finished. She moved to the mirror across the room and gasped at her reflection. Her skin was pale now, alabaster white like his. Her hair had lightened too, not fully white, but shot through with silver streaks. And her eyes were the red of fresh blood, just like his. "You're beautiful," Draven said, coming to stand behind her. "You were always beautiful, but now you're magnificent." Nora turned in his arms and everything felt new. She was stronger now, could feel the power in her limbs. Faster too when she moved, it was with the same fluid grace she'd always admired in him. And the hunger. Oh, she understood now why he was always so controlled. The thirst burned in her throat like fire. "I need," she started. I know, Draven said. I have supplies, fresh blood from willing donors. Come, let me show you how to feed properly. He taught her everything over the following weeks: how to feed without losing control, how to move through the world as a vampire, how to use her new abilities, the speed, the strength, the heightened senses, how to navigate vampire society as one of them rather than as a protected human. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and occasionally frightening, but Draven was patient, guiding her through every step. And gradually, Nora found her footing in this new existence. 3 months after her transformation, they returned to the council meeting. Nora walked in as Draven's equal now, not his companion or his pet. The other vampires regarded her with curiosity and a new level of respect. Well, Seraphine said, approaching them with her usual grace. Look at you, the starving human girl turned vampire queen. How does it feel? Powerful, Nora admitted. And right, like this is who I was always meant to be. Good. You'll need that confidence. The vampire world isn't kind to the weak. Seraphine glanced at Draven. You've trained her well. She carries herself like royalty. She is royalty, Draven said simply. She's my wife and my equal in all things. Over the following years, Nora and Draven built a life that neither could have imagined that night in the kitchen. They traveled the world together, spending decades exploring places Nora had only dreamed of. She continued writing, her novels taking on new depth now that she understood the supernatural world from the inside. Draven supported her completely, proud of her success and her talent. They worked together to reform vampire-human relations in their city and eventually across the region, implemented new laws that protected both species, created programs to help vulnerable humans like Nora had been, ensuring no one had to resort to stealing bread just to survive. Their love deepened with every passing year, strengthened by shared experience and mutual respect. They had eternity now, and they intended to use every moment of it. Sometimes, late at night, they'd sit in the kitchen where everything began. Draven would set the table with food not for eating anymore, but for remembrance. And they'd talk about how far they'd come, about the woman who'd broken in desperate for bread, and the vampire who'd responded with unexpected mercy. Do you ever regret it? Draven asked one night, 50 years after Nora's transformation. Giving up your humanity? Nora looked at him, this beautiful ancient creature who'd saved her life in every way that mattered. Never. You gave me everything that night, Draven. Food, shelter, purpose, love. You gave me a future when I thought I had none. Why would I regret spending eternity with you? I'm glad, Draven said softly, because I can't imagine existence without you anymore. You've become the center of my world. And you're the center of mine, Nora replied, taking his hand. Forever. They sat in the kitchen as dawn approached, two vampires in love, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something luminous. Outside, the world continued turning, centuries passing like days. But inside Thornheart Manor, time felt suspended, crystallized in moments of perfect contentment. Nora Oakes had broken into a vampire's kitchen to steal bread, starving and desperate and afraid. Draven Thornheart had caught her and, instead of punishing her, had set the whole table. That single act of compassion had changed both their lives irrevocably, setting them on a path neither expected, but both were grateful for. Now they had eternity to explore that path together, to build a life and a legacy that would outlast empires. They had forever to love each other, to face whatever challenges came their way, to prove that sometimes the most unexpected meetings lead to the most extraordinary destinies. The starving woman and the vampire king, the thief and the merciful. Two souls who'd found each other across the divide of species and circumstance, who'd chosen love over fear, together over alone. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after into eternity.